Chris and I would like to welcome sculptor and honorary member Brian Muir to this Q&A. Welcome, Brian, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with us.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Chris and Marcus. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. So since 1967, you've worked on over 70 projects, including franchises such as Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, James Bond, and of course, Star Wars. To us fans of the saga, and especially the 501st Legion, you're most famous for sculpting the Darth Vader and the Stormtrooper armor. With regard to the, I'm going to start off with the Stormtrooper. With regard to the Stormtrooper, the sculpting was based on paintings by Ralph McQuarrie. And how many sculpts did you have to do to get the final approval for it, for the next step for the vacuum forming process?
You're right. It was Ralph McQuarrie's concept art that I worked from, and I only had one go. Because although I started at the beginning of January, by the end of January, Liz Moore had left the picture. She'd gone out to be in Holland with her boyfriend. So I was the only sculptor on the picture then. So there was no time to have more than one go at it. I had to get it right first time.
Yeah.
I mean, I started on the chest armor and they liked the way that was going. But the whole thing with the Stormtrooper, it had to be something that would fit anyone from 5'8" to 6 foot. So they gave me a 5'10" high plaster model to work on, knowing that it could go, if someone 5'8" wore the suit, the joints would close up, and any smaller than that, they would be overlapping and the suit wouldn't work. Anyone above 6 foot, the gaps would get wider and you'd be seeing too much black. Yeah. So it had to be within that size. So, and it had to be done, you couldn't do it in one as such, because it'd have to fit a certain person then, like 3PO fitted Tony Daniels. So by doing the separate parts and echoing into the next part, you knew it could get wider and narrow and fit 50 people initially. Well, I say 50, they had 50 suits. I think it was something like 30 odd that actually wore the suit. So yeah, I started off with the chest armor, went on to the arms. There's something about the arms you might know or you might not know, but the little bits that set back in the indents down the arm, yeah. There's 12 one side and 11 the other. Yeah. And I didn't know that. It was someone that pointed it out. And I've got a film of the test shots. And I went back and I looked at both arms and there's one less on one arm than the other. So I had my maths went somewhat awry on the arms. But yeah, I went on and we were talking about what's on the back of your shirt earlier on.
Yes, yes.
And because I was so busy, I was the only sculptor, I thought, well, I'll do a little cheat because there was no Ralph McQuarrie painting at the back of the Stormtrooper. So John Barry and myself, we talked about it and we decided that the best thing would be is to put a raised panel there and put something on it. So I went down to the prop room and I found a plastic cog down there and 2 strips of wood. And obviously went back up and put it into the clay panel that I'd sculpted just to save time. And I've been asked so many times, what was I thinking when I did that? What was the reason for it? And I've always been honest and said the only reason for it is time. You know, it saved me time to do it.
Yeah, so here's the piece you're talking about.
That's the piece I'm talking about, yes.
You're 1-1, and you know, there's a little, you know, obviously a little joke out there, like, you know, what is this actually, you know, what is this actually? Some people say it's a emergency food storage unit that holds a donut and 2 Twinkies. You know?
It could be at that.
I mean, it would fit on the inside, you know, donut, 2 Twinkies.
Yeah, yeah.
You never know. But Yeah, so that's really interesting. So John Barry, the production designer, is that?
Yeah.
So
And
he gave the okay to after you sculpted the armor.
yeah, they loved it, and George Lucas did as well.
Okay.
He'd pop up occasionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, they liked that. And it was after doing the Stormtrooper, as I said, Liz had left the picture. So I was left with finishing C3PO, carving the whole suit up in the plaster stage. There is a picture of that, me carving C3PO's backside up in my book, In the Shadow of Vader. But yeah, so that was the next thing I did. I went on to doing C3PO and cleaning the Stormtrooper armor up as well. With C3PO, I had Tony Daniels, because it was getting so tight for time, because they needed C3PO out in Tunisia. When they started shooting, I think it was the 26th of March, they started shooting out in Tunisia, that there was no time to mould his hands and then me to sculpt something on. He came up to my workshop one lunch hour, and I had an hour to do the hands. So I did what I could, got him to wear some plastic gloves, and slid them off afterwards and tidied it up, and it was done. That was the way it was done. I carved the slots in plaster around the head, and then it moved on from our department. It was Ron, I can't think of Ron's second name. Lindsay? The painter, Ron.
Oh, Ron Punter.
Ron Punter, yeah. So he sprayed it using what they call a Steinart, where you spray it grey, then you spray it silver, and then gold.
Yeah.
And there is one C3PO that was done in silver rather than taking it to the gold stage, I believe. Although you nearly always see him in gold.
Is that the C3PO we see in the beginning, in the first few minutes of A New Hope?
It probably is, yeah.
You're right. Yeah. There was one on the 10-34.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So before we switch over to Vader and have Chris ask some questions, within the Legion, the Stormtrooper is the most popular costume. We have well over 5,000 approved costumes. So over the years, you've been to many conventions worldwide, and I'm sure Stormtroopers were present at all times. How does it feel to see them, off the screen, but still alive? Does that give you some sort of, satisfaction or approval of what you've accomplished back then?
Very much so. I mean, Lindsay and I, we both love traveling the world. We love seeing the 501st, and they've always been great to us. And it's great to see the Stormtrooper armor, and obviously Vader as well, but it's mainly Stormtroopers. The Stormtrooper has been very popular within the 501st and with other fans as well.
Yeah.
And something I enjoyed doing at the time. It was unfortunate that, the vacuum forming machine at Elstree broke down, and it shifted outside, but then that's another story that most, a lot of the 501st know about.
Yeah.
But it was enjoyable, and I do love traveling and seeing the 501st.
Yeah. Thank you for everything. Thank you for everything.
Brian, I wanted to ask Brian, I'm sorry, Marcus. This is a Stormtrooper question, which is probably going to be one of the few from me, because I'm far and away not the expert here. All deference to Marcus for sure. But I know, even just for myself as a fan watching the 501st over the years, watching the evolution of Stormtrooper costumers and the quality of the costume that the 501st has had from its early days till now, I'm very curious what Brian thinks of how much it's evolved in terms of the accuracy that we see from the costumers these days.
Yeah, I mean, I almost mentioned that, but there's so many different standards of costume made. I mean, up to the pinnacle, which is obviously RS prop masters are actually doing it from an original suit that Simon had from his uncle. But there are other good makers out there. The Trooper Master makes a good suit. There are some good prop makers out there that do make good suits. But it's always nice to see them, whatever. But as I say, RS do make a very nice suit. It's balanced just as the original was. And it's amazing. It's happened with Vader, it's happened with Stormtroopers. And the suit gets watered down because it's been mold in cast.
Sure.
And see that more with Vader, that it was never totally symmetrical and it wasn't meant to be.
Yep.
But over the period of time where it's been molded and cast so many times, it's twisted, and you see, I see it warped, and people think more and more that that's as it was. It wasn't symmetrical, but it's not as you see a lot of the Vader helmets now.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. You know, it's people buy what they can, and good luck to them.
I wanted to ask you about that, Marcus, if I can ask a Vader question.
Of course, it's all yours.
I wanted to ask you about that. The one of the long running interesting conversations my detachments had is really about the symmetry versus asymmetry component of Vader. Many of us love the asymmetry component of Vader, especially from the original trilogy. You know, the conversations have gone on for years, and we really appreciated the fact that, like in nature, that slight bit of asymmetry really helps kind of break up some of the surfaces, even in terms of the paint of the costume. And then when they decided to rebuild Vader and have Hayden Christensen play him, of course, the idea was we can finally make a symmetrical Vader for Revenge of the Sith, which was great for some fans, not so great for others. I'm not the one to judge for sure, but I'd love to hear your opinion on it, and especially your thought process on taking the concept work of Macquarie, which had several different variations, and how it became this kind of asymmetrical, terrifying sculpt that everybody knows nowadays.
Yeah, I have to say initially that I didn't do the helmet and mask from Ralph Macquarie's concept. I actually did it from a very small drawing, quick drawing with no shading or anything that I got from John Mollo.
Mm-hmm.
And that was John Barry. He came to me, I was just finishing off the work on C3PO, and he said, we've got a new character for you to sculpt. The name of the character is Darth Vader. Would you go down to John Mollo's wardrobe department? He's got a drawing down there for you. So I went down there and I got this drawing. It wasn't much to go by. And it was that I used to do the mask and the helmet. All the rest of it I did to Ralph Macquarie's concept art. The chest armor, the shoulder bells, and the shins were all to Ralph Macquarie's concept art, but the helmet wasn't. It was to a drawing that I got from John Mollo. Would you like to know how I went about doing it, or?
I'd love to. And specifically too, you mentioned the shins, and I was going to ask you about those, so maybe this is a good time to ask about it. Most of the shins that we've seen today, and again, we're all playing archaeology with costumes right here, since a lot of the original material never made it back from England. But the current thinking around the shins, that one shin was shorter than the other, and mostly that was due to the kind of hip dysplasia that Dave Prowse was dealing with at the time. Is there any truth to that, or did you try to sculpt two shins identically the same, and it just came out that way in wardrobe later on?
I don't know how much shorter it was, but no, it's nothing to do with hip displacement. I just had very little time to do it in. And I was using calipers and the like to do it. I actually had a plaster figure of Dave Prowse to work on. They did a full figure of him. Initially, I cut it off at the shoulders to do the mask and then the helmet, so that when I'd done the mask, they moulded and casted it in plaster. And initially, I did a back and a front to the mask. And it was only when Dave Prowse found it so claustrophobic that they discarded the back and just used the front and put the helmet on that.
For people who maybe talking about what Davis or what Brian's talking about, that's what it looks like from the back. That's partially what it looks
There was a back to it as well, which, as I say, they discarded.
Were there any details to the back that you had sculpted, or was it just a full?
No, it was just plain. Yeah, followed the line of the head with about ½ inch of clay on. But then they moulded that and cast it in plaster. And then I sculpted the helmet on top of that, knowing that it would fit on afterwards and look right. But it was, what were we talking about before? Something, oh, the shins. Lindsay, I've got a pair of shins here that are as close to the original. See, and people think that the original shins on A&H were vacuum formed. They weren't. They were fiberglass. It was only on Empire that they're a bit dusty, but can you see them?
Yeah. Oh yeah, beautiful.
And this is the other one.
And these are based on the original mold?
As close as you're going to get.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
If one's shorter,
and
it's
funny,
legs look shorter, isn't it?
I mean, I sculpted them on the legs.
It's slightly shorter.
No, I don't think that is.
At the bottom there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're the same length in the middle, but one comes down fractionally more than the other.
Hey, Brian.
Hello.
We got you back.
Yeah.
It's country living.
I can empathize with you. I'm at 4,000 feet in the middle of the Sierra Nevada, so I'm 100% on board.
Oh, that must be brilliant living there.
It's nice. It's good, especially when I go race down in the flatlands. It gets to be pretty fun because I have the red blood cell advantage naturally, I think.
Yep.
Right, actually, Chris, you asked me a question that I somehow got sidetracked on.
No problem. We were talking about the shins and you were examining the difference in length between the two that you had. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was really the inspiration off of that original sketch for Vader and the decisions around asymmetry and kind of where your thought process was when you were sculpting the original mask and dome.
Well, you did ask me about the Sith helmet, didn't you? The symmetry of that.
Yeah.
Well, they did use a computer with that one, and obviously it was symmetrical. A lot of the fans say that they prefer the original, and I have to say that I do as well. I'm not so keen on the symmetrical version of it. The other thing was, it was sometime after that, being on the film, that I was up in Alexandra Palace at an exhibition there, and a guy that was there said he worked on the Sith, but there were 6 of them worked on it for 2 months, and I did it by myself, the whole thing, in about 3 weeks. I mean, that's the difference in a way.
Martin.
Yeah, I think his name was Martin. Lindsay's just reminded me. Yeah.
He didn't like it either.
Funny enough, although he worked on it for the 2 months and there were 6 of them on it, he said he didn't like it as much as the original. But anyway.
That's an admission.
I must admit, out of the original trilogy, the slight changes that there were, I do prefer the A&H.
Do you really? Interesting.
I do, yeah.
We've had lots of debates about that over the years, and they all have a very different look to them. The A&H brow line and the widow's peak being kind of so low over the eyes just has this very menacing kind of a look to it. It's a snarly, almost kind of a face, and he gets a little bit more regal, doesn't he? With each subsequent movie, the dome keeps creeping higher and higher.
Yeah, I mean, with the second one, they cut the plasterers filed it straight across.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. This is a casting from one of the ESB helmets, and the A&H space was this kind of flat dome to connect it previously, and this ring was added for ESB, we think, to kind of raise that dome height a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, it was fix it, wasn't it? Because it used to slip.
That was all about the fixing, really. But that's a nice helmet you've got there. Actually, the 20th century is a nice helmet.
Yeah, it is.
It's not too far from the original.
Yeah, for me, I've always, I saw all movies in the theaters, and A&H obviously made the biggest impact. The opening scene with Vader on the Tantive 4 when you're 7 years old, and thank you for this, by the way, is one of the most terrifying moments I think I've ever had in movie theaters. But there was something about watching ESB at 10 and the refinements that Vader had, the refinements that the filmmaking had at that time that lasted just I still say is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen in my lifetime. It was impactful on so many different levels. It was amazing. Mm. How much did you with the original A&H costume? I wanted to ask, can you talk to us about kind of your inspirations? I mean, we've heard a lot of the stories, the kind of feudal Japanese influences that seem to pop out, but can you talk to us kind of about your research process, what you drew from, and what you were thinking about when you were kind of creating these initial sculpts?
Well, if I'm absolutely truthful about it, I sculpted to the reference I was given. It wasn't a matter of really thinking. I mean, they say about the German helmet, which I think it's closer to than Japanese. And funny enough, I went out to Japan to sign out there, and we went to this shop and they were made dolls there, but in the corner they had a Japanese version of Darth Vader's helmet done as a samurai.
Perfect.
Really good. And Stormtrooper as well.
Yeah.
I'm getting sidetracked again there. What was the question?
You said you were following the reference material as closely as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm a professional sculptor, and most of the times on different films, that's all you're doing is you're following the reference.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're designing stuff, but and on Vader there wasn't much to go from, but I had to make it work as a design. So I had quite a lot of input on the mask and helmet because there wasn't much there. It was different with the Ralph McQuarrie paintings. I had a lot more to go with there, and it was fairly tight to his design.
Yeah, I think about how much it could have changed if you had been given a McQuarrie drawing from the beginning versus the sketch that you were, and how different the character could have been.
I mean, it was a great design, but I don't think it would have worked. I mean, Dave Prowse has got quite a big head. If I'd have done that to him, it would have come out a mile. It would have looked quite strange, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it might have worked great. I mean, people might have looked more frightening than what I achieved, but
yeah,
it is what it is as such. Vader's iconic, and I don't suppose I can say too much more about it.
I don't think there's ever been a screen villain that's more iconic than Vader at this point, for sure.
Probably not. Even Stormtroopers secondary to Vader, I think.
Yeah. I think those two characters are probably the most two recognizable characters of the franchise. And speaking of, Chris mentioned the impact the movies had on him as a 7 and 10-year-old boy. So when you were working on Star Wars, A New Hope back in '76, you were in the business for 9 years, and you've completed some projects since then, and you've seen how successful those projects did become. So did you have an inkling, even the slightest, about Star Wars becoming what it is today?
Absolutely none at all.
I don't think anybody did.
Because we had only seen the likes of Doctor Who and, you know, I mean, series where the set shake and all sorts, you're thinking, oh my God, it's a sci-fi picture, it's not going to be that good. And it wasn't until in 1977 when we went up to London to see the crew showing, and the initial shot where that great big spaceship goes over the top, there was a round of applause from this crew that was so pessimistic.
Yep.
And it was a great film. It was before its time. And at the end of the film, the crews actually stood and it got a round of applause, which was amazing. I've never, ever seen it since in other films I've worked on and all the crew showings I've been to. So, yeah, it shows what a good picture it was. And I think probably Empire Strikes Back was better.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the trilogy, I think Empire Strikes Back was the best film. Even though I think the original Vader was better.
Well, now I have to retire my Vader and build in A New Hope. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great. But there's only those. I mean, the chin vent was made bigger on Empire, and they kept it for the Return of the Jedi. Yeah. And then in Return of the Jedi, they filled the strip in totally, whereas on Empire, all the plasterers did was they filed it straight across, and it's not actually straight, it goes up slightly if you really look at it.
Yeah.
And they left the Y in, which carries on up into the helmet. But then that was filled in for Return of the Jedi. It's just straight down and straight across, and obviously different paint finishes.
Did you have any? Are there any big differences you would point out to folks between the shoulder armor and the bells in A New Hope versus ESB and Return of the Jedi? Are there any changes done there?
I don't know. I don't think there was, as far as I know. I don't think there was any changes on Vader apart from the small changes on the helmet and mask.
We
been the main one on the mask.
Yeah, the only one we've ever noticed has been, it seems like at some point during ESB, they went from the shoulder bells being kind of loosely attached to actually hinges being put into them, so that they kind of created this continuous line. And the paint differences, but obviously you wouldn't have had anything to do with that.
Yeah, hinges, that sort of thing, they're practical stuff, but as far as I know, it wasn't re-sculpted.
Sculpt didn't change.
No. And no one, even those slight changes, sculptors didn't do it. It was the plasterers that made those slight changes. Just with it, you can file the chin vent bigger, and you can file the Widow's Peak off, and just fill the Y in for Return of the Jedi. I mean, it's such simple changes that it wasn't a sculpting job. Even the plasterers did it.
Yeah. How do you feel about those changes being made? I mean, I don't think you were consulted on a lot of them. It was just kind of practical things, like you said. But
no, I mean, I wasn't involved after A New Hope. I was off doing other films when the next two Star Wars films were made.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had nothing to do. I know about them and afterwards, but not at the time. I didn't know what they were doing. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to sculptors. I know that they didn't do a resculpt on Vader or the Stormtroopers still. With the Stormtroopers, the only thing on Return of the Jedi, they put a little tiny lip around the outside of the chest armor. But as far as I know, there was no other changes at all. I mean, there was all the politics with the Stormtroopers that have gone on since, and I was involved with a court case about 12 years ago that was quite common, known.
Yep.
Up in the Crown Court. But as I say, that's another thing. I mean, I did two other characters on Star Wars that were droids, and that's the Death Star droid, which was scene in the Sandcrawler and ZZ3, which I just did the helmets for those two.
Yeah.
But it was the Death Star droid was the last job I did on the film.
It seemed like the Death Star droid had some kind of shape language and visual cues that were pretty similar to Vader, especially maybe some of those later McQuarrie drawings. Where did some of that come from?
Again, I mean, I had a small drawing that that Ralph McQuarrie did. It was about so big. And there are pictures of me sculpting the Death Star droid that are quite common. They've been around the internet for some time now.
And in the book.
And in the book, yeah. I've lost my way.
But what were they? The sort of what were they from? What was the influence of those? Were they?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you were saying it was it early Vader? I don't know for certain, but it's been said they were. But it was just a small drawing that I had from Ralph McQuarrie, and I would probably think that it was maybe a drawing of an early version of Vader or something that they were thinking along the lines of.
CZ3 armor.
I would think it probably was, because it was a very tight budget, the movie then, and they used a lot of times what they could get. I mean, with the two last droids, the Death Star droid, they used stuff from C-3PO because Liz Moore had done a few different versions of it before they settled on the final version. And they moulded and cast that stuff. And I think they just used that. Other times they would just get metal work done for arms and that were just one-offs. Were not moulded and cast. They were just done in aluminium material. So it's the type of film it was, although it's, in a way, it's extremely polished for its time. They used whatever they could with the time they had to do it and money.
Right. I remember reading somewhere that George Lucas told you, when it comes to the sand troopers on Tatooine, he said, put a bunch of stuff on their backs. They're like, I don't know, they're troop ready. They need to go places. So it's amazing how resourceful you had to be back then by the prop department going to maybe surplus stores or just grabbing stuff. I mean, just the lightsaber is made out of what was it? I forgot now, but
flash guns, like a Great Flex or a micro precision flash gun. Yeah.
So it's whatever you could grab your
things that Star Wars nerds have laying around on their coffee tables in their living room is inserts to Highland flash guns for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Millennium Falcon, that was just plastic bits that were bought into the prop shop from washing machines and all sorts of household goods. They would actually crates and all sorts that they could just make it up. Yeah. It was just literally a metal framework that was covered in 8-quarter hardwood, and then just stuff applied. Again, done very cheaply, but very, very effective. I mean, it looked great.
Would you like to talk to us about how much time you were given to sculpt the most iconic film villain of all time? Loaded question, fair enough.
About 3 weeks.
Wow.
By myself. As I said, when Liz left at the end of January, I was there by myself, and I was the only sculptor. There was no one else, so I had to turn it out quick.
Wow.
And I'm a pretty quick sculptor anyway, which I've done on so many other films, so much work, and really turn the work out quickly.
For people who don't know, a 3-week schedule for something like that, especially back in the day, that feel like kind of a normal amount of time for you, or was that feeling a bit rushed?
a little bit rushed. I would like to have had a bit more time than I had. Just that it would have been slightly more polished.
Yeah.
If I'd have had that time, but we achieved what we could in the time, and I think it was pretty successful.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, time has told us that it's iconic, as we said earlier. And yeah, I suppose a lot of people have seen Vader over the years, all around the world.
Yeah.
And it's got us to even places like China. We went twice in 1 year. We went to Beijing and Shanghai.
For me as a Vader costumer, and I'm sure Marcus can say the same things as Stormtrooper, we were talking earlier about at least the impact that Vader had on me. It was a terrifying experience when I was a kid. I am constantly amazed these days with the caliber of costumes and the performances I see from people in your characters. I'm always set back by the reaction from fans. You know, 7-year-old girls, 5-year-old girls and boys that come running up screaming to hug Darth Vader when he's stomping around in his 6'7" or whatever it is. And these white legions of stormtroopers who look like they could take over a city, and kids just the reaction is always shocking to me. And I wonder if you've observed that and felt similar.
Very much so, especially the young girls hugging Vader. It's unbelievable. You think they'd be terrified of him.
Yeah.
They're not. They want to go up and hug him.
I think he needs a hug.
Yeah. And stormtroopers, funny enough, we did a New Year's Day parade up in London. And some of the 501st were up there, and it was quite a long parade, and we were collecting money for the hospital, Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. And we got to the end, and we'd been invited to go over to the museum, film museum in London, and to go across London Bridge with a couple of the stormtroopers. It took 3/4 of an hour to get across one bridge, about 50 yards. We were stopped every few yards. People wanted pictures with a stormtrooper.
When was this, Brian?
It was several years ago when we did a march through London collecting money. We were, Lindsay and I had a bucket each. Crowds were right, along the side of the road. So we were collecting money for the hospital. But this was at the end when it all finished. We went across we'd been invited to go across to a film museum up in London, not far from the Houses of Parliament, actually. So we went across the bridge, and that was it. Stopped every 2 minutes.
I bet.
Well,
you mentioned that dozens of stormtrooper costumes were made for A New Hope. How many Vader costumes do you know of that were made?
I'm not sure about the chest armor and that, but I know there are only two helmets that were used on the film. Well, one mainly was used on the film, and a backup helmet. And they were taken back to the wardrobe, and Ron told me this. I said earlier, there was my neighbour. They were put into a lockup every night and rolled back up to where the wardrobe was and locked in there each night. So there were two helmets. I think there was a third one that the special effects had been working on and played with that was never actually a finished helmet. So that was it, 2 and 1. And as far as I know, and I was told this by Alan Tompkins, unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago now. He was supervising art director, and he said that when they went on to Empire Strikes Back, they opened up a big container up on the lot, and the first thing he got out was Vader that Dave Prowse had worn, and it was changed into an ESB. Not many people know that.
Wow.
So there's maybe one helmet out there that is A&H.
Yep.
Where it is, I don't know.
since we celebrate not just Star Wars, 50 years of Lucasfilm, Indiana Jones is also a big part of that. Tell us something, if you can, about your experience working on that franchise.
Well, I worked on all three, but mainly it was Raiders of the Lost Ark and what's the second film?
Temple of Doom.
Temple of Doom.
Temple of Doom. Yeah, sorry, getting old. Yeah, on the first one, Raiders, the main things that you would probably recognise that I did was the snake that was in front of Harrison Ford.
Mm-hmm.
The Cobra, when they were shooting from behind his head, there was a real Cobra behind glass. They had a big glass screen there, and they could shoot that into the darkness, and it was fine. You wouldn't see the glass sheet. When they shot back the other way and you see Harrison Ford's terrified face, it's a snake that I sculpted. The Cobra I sculpted. So that's one job. Then there was the Ark of the Covenant, which a guy called Keith Short, who unfortunately passed away the other year, he did the angels on top, and I did a lot of the detailing on it. So the Ark of the Covenant was another one. A lot of the Egyptian paneling in where the Anubis figures were in the snake pit, I sculpted quite a few of them. In fact, it's recognised that on one of those panels, you've got R2-D2. Yeah. And I've been asked if I did that. And quite frankly, I can't remember if I did or not. There were two of us doing the panels, so there's 50% chance that I did it. But there was other work on that one I did, and at the end where they open the Ark, there's a set there that's done on stage, a rock set. So all the rocks and that were around were a joint job between the sculptors. There were three of us doing that, and the plastering department. But on Temple of Doom, I did a lot of really nice work on that. Even the opening sequence was one of my jobs, the gong with the dragon and the Paramount Mountains. Mm-hmm. And it starts on the Paramount Mountains and they gradually zoom back. You see that, and a guy going to hit the gong. Well, that gong, I had actually 2 days to sculpt that, the work on it. And I spent 2 weeks doing a gong before that, where the dragon went right around the outside of it. And I did the Paramount Mountains in the middle. And it was a job that I was very pleased with. And the art department said how great it was. But they'd got the scaling wrong, which meant that they couldn't use it. That's when I had 2 days to do what was seen on the screen. But there was things like the 14-foot python that came down out the tree onto the main actress's shoulder, and she grabs it and throws it. Well, I sculpted that python. And I don't know quite how the special effects worked for them to get it down onto her shoulder. It looked quite lifelike. And then when it's on her, because she was terrified of snakes, she wouldn't have a snake near her. Right. So I got the job of sculpting that. And in the same scene, there were baby elephants where they were sitting around the fire. Mm-hmm. And I had to sculpt a baby elephant's head, which had hair in the trunk, had proper eyes fitted and lashes and that. Yep. And the idea was that they could use up for close-ups, because you couldn't get a baby elephant to do what you wanted when you wanted to turn the camera over. Sure. So that's how they did that one. Originally, the idea was, the storyline was going to be that she was in a tent, laying down and trying to go to sleep, and she feels this, well, it's the baby elephant's head feeling round her back, and she thinks it's Indiana Jones getting through to. They didn't do it that way. They did it just sitting around the campfire. But then when the elephant's head is just over the shoulder of someone, it's the one I did. And there's all sorts of things that I did as well. The elephant's head, where Indiana Jones swings down onto the lower level. That was one I sculpted. It was quite nice actually, until the plaster was coated up with plaster and made it look all like stone-like and rough and that. But yeah, that was used. It was quite a funny thing actually. There was, now you had the lava come up and you had the sacrifice go down. Well, the sacrifice, the guy, they pulled the heart out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had the job of sculpting the heart, and the special effects did a double action pump thing on it. So it's going boom, boom, boom. And so that was quite a nice one to do. But they decided that they would like me to go up to Harefield Heart Hospital to see a heart surgeon to talk about doing the heart.
Jeez.
So I went up there and I was sitting there chatting with him about the human heart and asked him what's the closest heart I can get. So he said, well, the primates. Well, I couldn't get a heart of a monkey or whatever. So what's the closest that I can get in the domestic animals or whatever? So I ended up getting a sheep's heart, and I used that for the detail. And I had a plastic model of a heart that the hospitals use, just that I get the right placings for the veins coming off and all that. And as I was leaving, he turned to me and said, "Oh, I'm doing open heart surgery tomorrow. Would you like to come and watch?"
Oh boy.
I thought, no thanks. I could hardly stop him halfway through the operation and say, "Do you mind if I get a few pictures?" So no, I declined that one. But there was lots of other work I did on the picture, and
That lava flow.
yeah, the lava flow, which was quite a funny one, where the lava is, coming up and that. There was big lava flow there.
Mm-hmm.
And they got us to carve all this funny script on it. Well, as you do, there were loads of crew coming up saying, "Will you put my name on there or whatever?" Obviously, we did. So, yeah, there's names upside down or back to front or whatever, done in the sort of script as such. But yeah, we made it merry. But sometimes you have a little bit of fun doing film work. In fact, we had lots of fun over the years. But there's a lot of characters that work in the film industry. Not so much now, but there was in the old days. Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Well,
but yeah, there's lots of, 10 Bond movies.
Sure.
And lots of lovely work on there. I did the tiger shark for the first Bond movie I worked on, where Jaws fights the shark in the tank. Obviously, you can't have an actor fighting with a real shark. So, yeah, I sculpted the shark that he fights with. You also see it swim up to the actress. On that, there was lots of Egyptian stuff and that, for where Q had his headquarters out in Abu Simbel, out in Egypt, which I went out there and carved Abu Simbel some years later for a BBC documentary film. But yeah, Bond movies, the Octopussy Bird, the Swan for Die Another Day, where Bond's in supposedly an ice bed. It was actually, I sculpted that in polystyrene, then they moulded it and cast it in clear resin.
Wow.
So it looks like ice, but the fun of the film industry, you can make all sorts of things appear to be something that they're not really.
Of all the things you've sculpted in films, and maybe this is an obvious question, but is there one particular thing or even a particular detail that you think is probably your personal favorite, or I guess maybe something you're most proud of?
Some lovely work on Alexander the Great. There were some lovely panels and really nice. It's a lovely style to do, the Syrian or Venetian. And there was a 14-foot figure of a king on that with double wings. that I really enjoyed doing. And it was the one time in my life where I actually got applause. I'd finished this job and I heard applause, and it was the plasters who are awful. They take the piss all the time, excuse my language. And they were actually applauding me. And I don't know to this day whether it was because they thought it was a great job. It was a nice job, but I did it in 2 weeks, this 14-foot high figure by myself. I did it in 2 weeks. So I'm not sure whether they were impressed with the time that I did it in, which I said I would do it in, or the fact that they liked the work. I don't know. But that was one job. But there's so much lovely work you get to do in the film industry over a period of time. It's hard to pick any one out. I mean, that dragon that I did on Temple of Doom, that you don't get to see on the film, I was pleased with that. But yeah, there's a lot of nice work. And there's a lot of rubbish that you get to do over the years, rock sets and whatever, trees.
What would you want to redo? What's a piece that you could think of that said, if I really had a chance to do it over again, what's the piece that I want to redo?
Oh, I'd find it hard to pick one out. Probably some of the worst jobs you actually do, because you've got some ridiculous time limit, the camera's running. Because once that camera starts running, a film, you get lots of time up until the camera starts rolling.
Yeah.
But any sets after that have to be done on time. So sometimes you're asked to do stuff in silly times. So you do the best you can in the time, and that's it. So some of that work, maybe you could say, yeah, I'd like to do again and have the proper time to do a decent job. But when you're a professional in the film industry, and I was for 48 years, you do the best you can with what you're given, whether it be time, whether it be with the reference you get. Sometimes there's no reference, you make it up. Sometimes it's better than, and sometimes it's not quite as good. You don't quite get there. If you've got the reference, then you get it exactly as it was. If it's an Egyptian panel and they give you a picture of it, then that's it, you do it. I mean, things like Clash of the Titans I worked on. I did figures, a 25-foot figure on that, 10-foot high Assyrian balls, the entrance to the city. I did all the panels that go around that. And again, you know, you do what you can in the time. Went out to Malta on that. I was mainly at Pinewood on that, but I went out to Malta for 6 weeks. And there were 2 of us out there, and we had 2 Assyrian balls at the archway to do, which I pretty much sculpted. We had a freestanding one that we both sculpted, and we both sculpted the 25-foot figure. So it was hot out there, and we didn't have an inside area. And we were outside in our shorts, sunglasses, because you're using a white material, drinking water all day and sweating and getting polystyrene bead. We were covered with like snowmen, really, all day long. So, you know, it's just, you get on with whatever you're doing. That all worked well. And there was a lot of nice work on that picture. Again, that was all Assyrian work. Yeah, lovely. The guy, the designer on that was a guy called Frank White. He was MGM Studios. He was the second in command on the art department, or the art side. Elliot Scott ran it, and Elliot Scott was the designer on Temple of Doom. And he was actually offered Star Wars. And he was doing other work at the time. And Norman Reynolds had been designer on, the art director on the first one under John Barry, supervising art director. Elliot Scott said, well, why don't you get Norman? He was on the first one. And they got Norman in to do the next 2 pictures. Before then, Kevin Bouquet got the next 3 pictures, and the 2 that went out to Australia. But yeah. I did do a little bit on Force Awakens and Rogue One. Did a few bits and pieces. I can't talk about it before we go any further.
How did you feel about talking about Force Awakens or the new trilogy? How did you feel about some of the character design and the shape design? Especially, I'm curious of your thoughts about Kylo Ren as a character and as a sculpt, really.
I didn't like it much.
No,
I didn't. As a person, other people might love it. I'm not so keen personally.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The newer generation, it's what they grew up with, and so my kids in particular, they're growing up with these movies, and so they're all about Kylo Ren. I kind of have the like, really? He's the one. I mean, love the movies, and I think the character was interesting, but you know, for me, you gave all of us in the 70s something that feels pretty special and unique compared to all of film history. So I don't know. They're young kids. I'll let them have what they want. But at the end of the day, I think I'll stick with Vader.
Yeah, I think I might as well. I mean, there are lots of lovely characters, good characters, but that was one character that didn't ring true to me. It didn't quite work.
Vader has a strange, I don't know. I wanted to ask you about this. Have you ever had the opportunity to spend any time on set during filming with Prowse and costume? Or what was your first experience with somebody fully kitted up as the entire character of Vader?
Conventions.
Really?
I never went on to set when they were filming. I popped onto set just to have a quick look at the sets in my dinner time and that, but not when they were filming. I was so busy up in the art department in the little workshop that I had doing work that I just didn't leave. It was, I had the head down for the 4 months that I was there because I only had 4 months to do everything.
Yeah. What was your impression the first time you got to see kind of somebody fully kitted up as like a really solid looking representation of your character?
Impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been a few really good Vaders over here. Yeah, two that are particularly good, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to upset anyone. Or
we don't want the UK garrison getting a little bit too ahead of themselves, right?
Yeah, I've seen good Vaders all over, really.
Yeah.
Germany particularly, there's some good Vaders, and obviously in the States.
Yeah.
But it's all spread out in the States. You know, you don't see it quite so much there. And I travelled all over the States, really, to different conventions. I mean, one of the nice ones was obviously Anaheim at Celebration.
Yep.
The last one they did there. I did one at down in Florida, Orlando, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was nice. What, 5 years ago, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all changed now. I don't think I'll be invited to another one. I'm sure I won't be. So they're all the stars. With the Tops cards taking over, it's a different lot, and they're not into backroom people like myself.
Well, we'd very much like to see you out here for the next one in Anaheim for sure.
I'd love to come, but as I say, I don't think. I mean, as I say, the 501st have treated me so well over the years, and I know I've got a big fan base in a way, but it doesn't get up to a certain stratosphere that invite people to. I go to conventions all over. Don't get me wrong. Last year I had some lovely conventions lined up, and not so much in the States, but all over Europe, different countries. I went out to Hungary in 1976 after Star Wars. The first film I did was a film out in Hungary called Prince and the Pauper. Well, last year I got invited to go back to Budapest to a convention, and it got called off.
Right.
I'm going again this year, though.
There you go.
I can't wait to go back out to see Budapest that I saw all those years back. in 1976 when you had Russian troops on the streets
Right.
of West from the 1956 uprising there, where the Russians took over. And I had it one night where I walked round a corner and there were Russian troops with Kalashnikovs fairly late at night. And it's a bit nerve-wracking. Even the interpreters were frightened to say anything, you know, at that time. But it was a great place to visit, and I'm really looking. I'm going back there in July.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of really nice ones that I couldn't go. 3 or 4 of them I'm going back to this year, but there's one or two not.
Well, we hope to see you over here if we can.
Love to come. We did go. We just got one in Florida,
Oh.
in Cocoa Beach.
Mhm.
We went to one there, it's a fairly small one, but really nice, friendly people, very enjoyable. 501st were really nice. We enjoyed it. But we've been all over the States. In fact, we did have our own house down in Spring Hill in Florida on the Gulf of Mexico, about 40 miles up above Tampa. And from there, we went all over. And we got invited to go to New Mexico to do one there. And we decided to do a road trip. So I drove 1,600 miles, stopping over 5 days to get to Albuquerque. And we did one there, which was nice. But I enjoyed stopping at New Orleans for 2 days. We stopped at can't remember the name of the springs we stopped up. It was incredible. They make
Sarasota Springs, maybe?
No. You probably wouldn't know it if I said it, actually. But we stopped at various places. Fort Worth. We stopped in the stockyard there, where they run the cattle through an area, the street every day. Stopped in the Stockyard Hotel, and they had all the rooms, the Sundance Kid and all that sort of thing. So yeah, we had a great time going around there, and Albuquerque was very different. Going up to Santa Fe, where all the houses are built in the adobe style. So that was really nice up there. Yeah, loved it. Love America, but I must admit, it's the journey out there is getting harder and harder as we get older. But yeah, we'll carry on enjoying it.
Of course.
As and when we can.
We hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might, there might be a celebration in London again, or a bigger convention that draws a lot of international people. We might see you there. We'll be traveling for you.
We did go up to the London one, not as for me signing. And Jason Joyner was running that one, and there weren't many signers there anyway. But we did go up there just to see friends and that, and we had fun up there. So if there was one in London, we'd probably go down and go up to it.
Yep.
But I don't know that I'd travel all the way out to Anaheim if I just to be a fan as such. We did go to Orlando. We were actually out there, and that's right. We sold our place. We did a tour around America for 6 weeks, and then we went back and we went to Celebration for 2 days in Orlando. The last one, saw lots of people we knew there, and it was really enjoyable just to be there and be a fan. But I don't know that I'd travel out to especially be there. I know there are a lot of super fans that would travel from around the world to be there.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking a lot of your time to talk with us. The stories you shared were exceptional. Some we've never heard of. I'm sure some of our viewers never heard of. So thank you again for doing that. And Lindsay, thank you for chiming in when you
She's gone.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
It's been a pleasure. Nice chatting to you guys. It's really been nice.
Yeah.
I could sit and chat all day about different films I've worked on, but you know, time's time.
It's interesting for me. It's you know, I'm sure you hear this a lot, but the impact of your work, you know, Star Wars is still a movie, I guess, at the end of the day, right? And so you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. But you know what your mind as a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old kind of latches onto, and some of the lessons that movie gave, and certainly the impression that your characters made on me as a kid were tremendous and long lasting. And I'm 50 years old now, and I still dress up as one of your characters to go make kids happy every once in a while, which still seems a little incredible to me. But yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's thanking you personally for your hand in that. It was a big deal. And I know that a lot of fans, both the Legion wide and worldwide, feel exactly the same way.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. And hopefully I'll get to meet you both one day.
For sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.